This is episode 57 with Tim Pazda, Jim Klinck, and Christa Rapoport.
Welcome to Spot On Insurance. Join us each week as we speak to insurance professionals, attorneys, regulators, and compliance specialists on topics ranging from improving your agency to staying on the right side of the law. Subscribe and stay informed on the effects of new trends and disruptive emerging technologies on your businesses and your industry.
Today, Arlene and I are looking forward to interviewing not one but three guests. The first, Tim Pazda, is an executive at BlackStratus, where he serves as Vice President of Business Development. He has a demonstrated history of working in the computer and network security industry. He is skilled in enterprise SaaS, software as a service, sales, strategic partnerships, professional services, and data centers. Next is Jim Klinck. Jim is an information technology and professional services consultant. He's a Fortune 500 technology leader who's done exceptional work in global business development. He's had oversight of $250 million budgets, which include responsibility for 2,700 developers in over 8 technology centers worldwide. Our third guest is Christa Rapoport. Christa is an insurance regulatory affairs attorney and consultant working with Taplin Goldwater. Krista works on regulatory issues in all 50 states in the areas of life, health, property and casualty, and workers' compensation. Her clients include insurers, technology companies, and insurance producers. I'd like to welcome all of you to Spot On Insurance. Krista, you're back.
Yes, I'm back, and I'm happy to be here.
We are just super excited to have you guys. We're going to be jumping into some heavy duty information, and I'm just excited for what you're going to be sharing with us.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about each one of you? We give some folks a little bit of a history on maybe your career, what's going on, and then we'll head on into the topic dealing with IT and cybersecurity, regulatory, and business risks, which I think is going to be a wowzer.
Jim, why don't you start?
Okay, thanks. Glad to be here. I've had a long career in information technology, all of it within the insurance industry. So I've been in the business 44 years. I started as a programmer, worked my way up, eventually was the chief information officer at MetLife in Canada. And I've been at AIG, which taught me a lot about global IT and how to govern it. So if you think about 140 countries around the world that are all doing information technology, trying to ensure that they're all compliant. So a lot of experience in that area. And I'm currently with System Infrastructure Innovators as an executive consultant, and we're helping companies with this issue and other infrastructure issues in terms of moving data centers and that type of thing.
Excellent. I can't wait to hear what you've got to say about this whole topic. Now, Tim, tell me a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me join. So my career started off as a consultant, and I evolved up through the telco world, running security for SBC and AT&T, and also did a stint running the security program at Hewlett-Packard before I came to BlackStratus.
Now, Krista, you've been here before, but give us a little short intro on you.
Okay, I started life as a nurse, and then I became a lawyer, and I worked in litigation, and as part of that, I became connected with AIG, a global insurer. And I came on and I did government relations, contracting, and then I got into IT and other issues because governance was part of financial examinations for insurance companies. I went to, later on in my career, startup, and that's actually where I met Jim. We both have AIG experience, and we both have startup experience. So we know what it's like to be in a global company that has exquisite infrastructure. There's corporate governance, and folks know their responsibilities. And we also know what it's like to be in a company where everyone's learning and people are like, you mean that's not just an IT duty? So today I am consulting with the Nelson Taplin Goldwater Group. And many times in 2 instances today, I have companies who received a call or letter from a state department of insurance saying, you don't have enough infrastructure for IT, or you don't have a good IT system, or you insure, you are great financially and you're a nice company, but we're concerned about your cybersecurity and your technology. So I work with Jim and sometimes Tim. We team it, and from an operational perspective, we figure out what is necessary to make the company compliant and more secure against cyber risk.
Oh my goodness. I thought licensing and regulatory compliance having to do with licensing was complicated, but what you guys are going to be talking about is super complicated, but it's so necessary. So we're going to be jumping into IT and cybersecurity regulatory. And I know that it's a hot topic right now. I know New York came out with a cybersecurity filing requirement. So I know you guys are going to be talking about that. And we're going to be talking about how it impacts not just insurance agencies, insurance companies, but businesses in general.
So guys, let's go immediately into why should we care? How is this going to impact the folks in the industry?
Well, I'll take the first stab at this one, Ted. We have realized as a nation, also in the regulatory community, that having cybersecurity is vital for state insurance to flow. It's good for our society, and we need to have more uniform standards. And the states have woken up to the fact that if our businesses are not protected, then they can be attacked, and this can really hurt business, and it can hurt people. Because of that, we can see that in 2017, at least 42 states introduced more than 240 bills or resolutions related to cybersecurity. We know that we had to take good interest in making sure that we have good security practices in the government. And then the government saying, hey, what about you, private industry? You need to look at what you're doing. You need to restrict access. And you really need to think about a holistic view of security. And why should you care? Because if you don't care and you don't take action, then you're going to be caught flat-footed by laws. It's very easy to take a look at where you are from a risk perspective and put in procedures and put in technical capabilities and to align yourselves with people like Tim and Jim who can help you make your company reasonably safe.
I know that now there's, like you said, I think maybe 240 bills that have gotten passed on this issue, but it just makes business sense to do the right thing, right? Because so many times it's going to be your business's reputation. So it's not like you should be led so much by the regulations, but it just, you have so much data, so much information on people and companies. You want to be doing the right thing, protecting that information. People are trusting you with their business. So it's great that the regulations are there, and it's awesome because a lot of companies probably wouldn't be complying unless that guideline is there, but it's just the right thing to do.
It is the right thing to do. And I met a company yesterday, and they were talking about the New York Department of Financial Services telling them that they need to have more cyber awareness. And so when we were talking, it's a really well-run business. And when I was talking to the CEO and a CIO, I realized you're already doing so much of these things. The takeaway is that he needs to document it more and put in writing when they were using things. So there's a little bit more formality, but well-run businesses who use technology as a way to make their business happen, well, you're probably already doing so many things, and things that we talk about today, you might say, oh, that's a good idea, but it's really formalizing it as part of your governance, and it's the right thing to do.
Well, I'm very interested in hearing how this is all going to work, especially because, to me, this is evolving. These attacks, they come from so many different places. It almost seems to me like it's a wall full of holes and water coming through it. That's the way these people keep getting in. And how do you defend yourself, number one, against that? We know that everybody's scrambling. I don't know that there are any answers yet. I look and think, wow, could maybe blockchain be a solution in the near future as that evolves and it closes some loopholes? But still, it seems to me that if it continues to evolve out here, that it will also continue to evolve in the law and the regulations.
That's so right. Before we go there, I just want to give you like 7 basic ideas that Jim, Tim, and I thought about. And why this happened is that, you have an insurance broker, perhaps. You're in Virginia. You're doing great. You're very profitable. You have a great infrastructure, a great team. And then you get a letter from New York saying, hey, you have a non-resident license. It looks like you have more than 10 employees or independent contractors. You have more than $5 million in gross annual revenue. And hey, if you talk to your finance guy, he'll probably confirm you have $10 million and year-end total assets calculated by GAAP principles. So you have to take care of yourself. Well, there are 7 basic things. 1, business impact analysis for IT strategy. 2, you need written IT policies. Then 3, keep written records of when these were implemented. 4, you have to provide documentation if New York, let's say, ask you for it. 5, provide contracts. And we'll talk about what you should do with vendors. There's a few things you want to add to your standard contracts to make sure that you have some protections. 6, keep formal minutes for both your board and when you've delegated things. And 7, do formal IT testing. One company told me that, hey, after Storm Sandy came, we were totally up and running. We were able to take care of clients, and so this shows we're good. Well, that's fine that you had a real disaster, but you should schedule your impact testing to make sure that you're okay. Jim, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with that list. I think that some of the challenges today, Krista, you mentioned vendors, for example, and a lot of companies, again, think that, well, I've taken care of this aspect of my IT because I'm buying this service from a third party. But the regulators look on this, and in fact, it's just common sense when you think about it from a business perspective, is the accountability for that service is still with the business. So when you sell a policy or a customer provides you with their personal information, it's still your responsibility for the handling of it, regardless if you delegate something to a third party. So we'll talk later about some of the issues, but really scrutinizing vendors and tightening up some of the contracts is very important. The other thing is that there's a big cultural change that this impacts on an organization, because the regulators will look for accountability in the business. So you can't just say, oh, my IT is provided by ABC company. They'll want to know who in the company is responsible for the policies that Krista talked about, who is responsible for security. And then the question is, procedurally, how do you know that the vendor's doing what you ask them to do, and those kinds of things? And we can elaborate more on those as we go ahead. But that's often a big cultural change as companies evolve and their volume of business gets bigger, that takes them into this sphere of increasing regulation. So you must have that accountability in place, and that goes, right through back to how does the board of directors and the CEO know that security is taken care of without having to be an expert in security themselves.
So for clarification, then, what you're saying is that internally you are responsible for your cybersecurity. So it's not enough, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not enough to have a company externally doing this. You have to have somebody assigned internally who's taking care of it from the inside as well, like a point of contact or somebody who is actually doing day-to-day security for you. Is that right?
Not necessarily doing the security, but supervising the vendor if you've outsourced it. If you're keeping it in-house, then that's correct. But if I'm buying that service from somebody, how do I know that they're really doing it? So that means you have to do things like look at their hiring policies. Are they doing background checks on their employees? Because you can't just send it out to somebody and then find out that, somebody who's committed a felony is now in charge of your server.
That's a really good point.
Yes, we have to keep in mind that the threat landscape, it changes daily. It requires constant management and improvements and seeing where do things stand. Tim is such an expert on these things. Can you give us a few words about how you manage?
Absolutely. I think one of the things we all forget is really what the driver of these regulations are for. In 2014, over $1 trillion was lost in internet commerce via fraud. That beat out, for first time ever, the illegal drug trade. So, and that is just in cash value. That does not include any of the proprietary information that's lost, any of the PR damage that happened. But over $1 trillion our country lost. So these regulations are here to protect businesses, to keep them in place. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, with internet and cybersecurity laws, it's written by IT people, but then the language is kind of turned over by a legal team. So it seems very overwhelming and daunting when you read it line by line. The actual ease with the expertise that we have in this country through various consulting groups and various partners to implement a program like this, it's not as difficult as it looks. And as you said, Krista, it is an evolving program. It's not something you just turn on and walk away. The threat landscape does change daily. People change daily. You hire new people, you let people go, you bring in new technology, you phase out old technology, new laws, new regulations come out. So the program has to evolve with the climate that you're in. And it is different for each type of vertical, whether you're government or if you're healthcare or bank. Staying on top of it, if you have the right processes in place, though, is a very manageable thing to do.
So what we have to do is think about, like, what are the things that we have to look out. Some of them are common sense, like if an employee is abusing the laptop and it's going to bad internet sites, that might allow viruses to creep in. Or you have a vending machine company that brings snacks to the company, and you haven't paid attention to the fact that they have automatic reporting back on when the inventory is low. That could allow something in. So it's really being holistic about, how does your company operate? What does it look like? Where are the risks? Because who can come in and out, and at what points? And so how do we police this? How do we protect this? And then how do we make sure that people within the company are behaving? Do we allow them to bring their cell phones? Do they allow them to use those cell phones for business? If they're bringing a laptop home from work and they're going to the doctor, should they just leave it in their car if it has personal information? These are the real issues that we really have to look at. So when we talk about an IT strategy, I think we should talk about, and Jim can really help to this, how the data governance and classification. How do we look at our company and the type of information it has?
We're talking a little bit about sort of what I'll call the network security. How do people get in? What are the avenues that we could have malware infect some of our devices and cause a problem? The other side of this gets into, how do we protect the data? And it's challenging today. I guess the first thing I would say is that you have to understand what data you're collecting and where it is. So one of the things that's important is sort of some degree of understanding of the systems that you're using. And in this day and age, sometimes it's a combination of systems that you're running yourself on desktop computers, servers, or it may be a service that you buy from a third party that's running in the cloud and you're signing on to it. You have to understand what data you're storing, and then there are things that we would guide you through in terms of making sure the data that's stored is encrypted, so that if somebody does breach the database, they can't read the data. A lot of it gets into the application that you're running. So if it's a policy system or a commission system, how does that system protect the data? Because most of your employees are coming into that system to access the information. So there's usually things tied into the policies, procedures, and responsibility back in the company for defining those IDs for access and various things that we would put in place through policies as to how often they're changed and how things happen when somebody terminates the company to take their access away. There are a lot of studies that show a lot of times in companies, somebody that left the company 3 months ago, they forgot to delete their ID and they're still there. So there are procedures like that we talk about as well. You can't protect the data if you don't understand where it is and what you're collecting.
One thing about policies and procedures, we were working with a company, and they said their law firm was writing all the policies and procedures. And then we looked at it, and we noticed that they were out of date. The technology had evolved so much, and so things they were trying to protect did not make sense. So one thing, when let's say you're brokerage, and you're like, okay, I need some policies, procedures to pay attention to those things that, let's say, South Carolina or New York are requiring of their licensed insurers or brokers or producers or technology platforms who are not licensed but are doing work for insurers. You want to make sure that when you get them, that you have to have them conform. That means adjust it to your company. And then those should be reviewed and introduced to your board of directors, or senior management should take a look at it and saying, what are we doing as a company? The IT and cybersecurity function can't be a footnote on the board minutes. There should be a presentation to senior management so they understand what's happening.
Yeah, I think this is something that we talked offline before we started, and that this thing has evolved, and it used to be an IT issue, but now it's a CEO issue, and they have to be involved. So that's what you're referring to at this point?
That's right. It's no longer, that's the IT department, I don't want to know about it. As senior management, you better be interested in this. You better have an understanding. And that's not, at 50,000 feet, how does this operate? As a company, I have policies and procedures. My IT department has made sure that these make sense technically. I am training people, my HR department, when they hire someone, are giving people the rules that they have to follow. And I am testing on occasion, and I have to know this is happening in my company.
So, we have a lot of large insurance company professionals that are listening to our podcast. We have insurance agency owners that listen to this. Right now, you guys have talked about people bringing in their cell phones, employees using their laptops at work. You even talked about the vending machine. And I really want to go back to the vending machine because that's like really freaking me out. Like, what type of software or issue can be going on there that, it's taken an assessment of the inventory in the machine, and that can present some type of liability to this company. I think a lot of agency owners right now are probably like, just give me a checklist of what I need to do. So help me out here, guys.
Okay, so in real life, we do use checklists because it's a little overwhelming. There's so many things. But like if it's vendors, like in this case, it was, let's say they're selling candy bars and snacks. And it was just like that the vending machine was sending a message to the vending machine supplier, but no one realized there was no protection, encryption, or anything on that link. So it was a weak link. And
wow.
It was surprising. It was shocking, really.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's crazy. So they brought on the issue of, what do you do for vendor contracts? And so with the contracts, we have to say to them, okay, if you are going to, supply, if you need to have access to our systems, you need to have X, Y, and Z. If it's a breach or a problem, you need to notify us so we can help you out. Or even if it's, Jim, I think it's good for you to talk to this because you have expertise.
This would take you back to the policies again. So in effect, this is a device that's going to connect to your network. So you would have to have a policy that causes anything like that to be reviewed. It's a good example in the sense of the management in the company may not have the skills to do that, but they need to enforce the policy that says, this vendor wants to connect to our network, so I've got to have it reviewed by this person or a third-party provider. And they will be asking the kinds of questions that Krista was illustrating in terms of how this device is protected on the network so that it can't access your servers and information, which is quite technical, but it's not something the management and the company needs to understand. They just need to make sure they've got a process so that when something like that happens, anything that's connected to the network must go through this type of a review. That's just one example. But there are it's increasingly common because it's more and more common for devices, even an employee, to bring in some little device that wants to connect to your network. Companies get into this on their Wi-Fi networks where guests arrive with laptops. So you need to decide as a company, am I going to let them on my network or am I going to provide what's often called a guest network? So when visitors come, they can sign on to the guest network, but that network will not allow them to act anywhere near my servers and information, but it will let them get to the internet so that they can work. So there are a whole set of things like that that flow out of what are the policies about my network and who can connect to it and how I ensure that people that are coming in are authenticated and the people that I want to have access to the network. So a lot of the solutions flow out of the policies like this, and then the technical organization that you've contracted with or your own IT department, if you have one, can enforce those rules for you.
We seem to have a very good IT department at Ilster, because I tell you, as the CEO and COO, we walk in there at times and we cannot get into our own systems. They have to give us, we go in with our laptops and everything else like, nope, it's been changed, sorry. So I know that they're doing their job, because if we ourselves cannot get in most of the time until, we settle down, we have to call everyone and say, hey, let us in, guys. So I think that's what you're talking about, really having everything on kind of a lockdown.
That's true. And then, it's also policing. I went to a credit reporting agency at headquarters, and I got to go to their situation room and their war room. And in one, I saw these screens with attacks coming from across the globe, and they come at different times. And I was able to see Trojans and all sorts of viruses. And I thought, wow, if they have this and they have these soldiers patrolling, what would a small company do? Well, that's one reason I became interested in CyberShark by BlackStratus Group, because they can basically take their cyber hat, put it on top of your company, and their folks patrol and help you stay safe or react appropriately to risk. Tim, could you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, we monitor the infrastructure against real live threat intelligence that we've gathered globally. And if we see items that are relevant to that infrastructure, whether it's a port open or a type of software might be outdated, we alert our customers on the right process to update it, why it's important, how that reflects on their policies that they have in place today, whether it's an incident response plan or maybe their overall firing of an employee. Our world now is so connected. Back in the good old days, you had your network and you had this great big perimeter on the outside and one point in and one point out. It's not like that anymore. Business thrives on accessibility and connectivity 24/7. We cannot have a network that's only open from 8 to 5. It's running constantly. It's around us everywhere. We can connect from all parts of the globe. And that's what keeps business going. With that, it has to be monitored live in real time to make sure that everything that you're doing is normal business operations, nothing outside of that scope that puts that company in a risky position. Anything online, you're at risk. The whole idea of cybersecurity programs is to reduce that risk. I used to tell my employees and my customers before, your goal is just to be a little bit more secure than the guy next to you. It's no different than in your neighborhood. If you have a big sticker on your window saying the house is monitored by ADT or whatever alarm company and your neighbor doesn't, chances are they're going to hit your neighbor's house first. We're making them more and more secure. And it goes back to the point that you made, Chris, that this is an evolving program. It's not stagnant. It's not something you write once and walk away from. Landscape changes daily. Applications change daily. Employees change daily. So BlackStratus with CyberShark, we try to help our customers keep up with those. Even involves bringing in new technologies. We give recommendations. Should we allow our employees to use Skype? It has vulnerabilities. We all know that, but can we limit them? Bring your own device. Some companies still only issue cell phones that are allowed on that network, and then you carry your own personal cell phone. The majority of companies nowadays, though, they allow you to bring your own device. I can hook up my iPad, I can hook up my iPhone, or my Samsung Galaxy, whatever it may be. And we define that as the Internet of Things now. And every endpoint still has some level of vulnerability associated with it. Now, granted, is it a huge vulnerability? Maybe not, but it's still a level of vulnerability, and some risk is acceptable.
Tim, are we at the level where we have evolved from having an IT department handling cybersecurity to where cybersecurity is a department of its own? Krista just mentioned going somewhere where that's all they did was monitor that stuff. And it seems to me like it's evolving to the point where IT is a completely different area than cybersecurity. It's taken on a life of its own and probably will evolve to that. Or is is a company like CyberShark taking on that role so that we don't have to evolve to that next step?
Ted, that's a good point. So right now, there is a tremendous shortage of IT security professionals in the industry. We're running about 3 million bodies low of what this country really needs. For a small to medium business, it's very difficult to obtain and keep that talent. We work with a lot of state and local governments. That's great, but a state and local government, they can only pay $80,000, $90,000 for a senior person that's tied to the IT department. Well, security engineers, if you're a level 2 SOC analyst, your base starts at 170, and it doesn't matter what state you're in. That's the demand for these individuals. So a lot of companies are kind of forced to go to outside expertise. It's much more cost effective. They have experts that can walk in, they've already experienced a network or process or a vertical that they're already in. They can turn up the service in a couple days, start their program to that evolution state within a week, as opposed to waiting months, possibly years, to get it to the point where it's acceptable, where that risk is reduced.
But as Krista said earlier, then you've got another job, and that other job is to monitor that security group external from where you're working to make sure that they are doing their job. And that's another chore on itself, I think.
That's an important role within the broker or the insurance company itself to monitor that. But I agree completely. I mean, these skills are highly sought, they're expensive, and in today's world, they're generally leveraged in the industry that way, so that you buy a service from a company that's maybe servicing 1,000 companies and has tremendous expertise on security when they need it. There's no single silver bullet, so you're usually doing things that involve procedures in your own company, things that the security provider is doing for you. Sometimes they're managing devices on your network for you, and then you will sit down and have what's called service level agreements with them that define what services they're providing, what the results were. You'll have what we call incident tracking. So if there is a breach on your network that's detected, what's the mechanism to talk to the company and get action back from the company and make sure that the issue is dealt with? Procedures like that somebody has to be accountable for back at the carrier or the broker that are not technical per se. Whoever's doing them will certainly learn about technology through doing the process, but that person can rely on the vendor that they select to educate them to some extent on the issues, but then they have to supervise what the vendor's doing, because when the Department of Insurance comes in, they will want to see, well, what are your logs on the incidents that you had? What are the logs? How did you get the items closed? So again, that's more of a business issue than a technical issue, although it borders on the technical depending on how the incident was handled. So I don't want to scare people that they have to all of a sudden have this massive technical expertise in their company. It really is a business issue. And they need to as part of this process as well, to think about when you're doing the policies, we referred to this earlier, what kind of company do we want to be? Do we want to allow people to use their own devices, or do we want a culture that says, no, the company will provide everything? There's no right answer to that, but depending on what you want to do, the policies and procedures you put in place will be somewhat different. And those are the kinds of things that we provide guidance on to companies. And then if they're interested, we can help them make sure that they get those procedures executed with their provider, whoever's providing their IT services and security services. So I want to bring it back to the business level, because you have to take these issues and make sure that these risks are covered. And the third-party providers will help you with that. But in the end, the accountability is back in the company from the Department of Insurance standpoint.
Spot On is sponsored by Insurance Licensing Services of America. Need help with corporate name changes, annual returns, or surplus lines tax filings? Feeling overwhelmed? If you're looking for experts in regulatory compliance, you've come to the right place. ILSA provides the industry with over 50 services. To learn more about the company and how they can help, visit ilsainc.com.
So it seems to me that it's really, at the end of the day, it's about either peace of mind that you get with perhaps outsourcing that entire part that cybersecurity that you might not have your expertise in, especially now with businesses being located anywhere in the U.S. They are operating from anywhere because of, the internet. And so at the end of the day, it's really about getting that peace of mind of outsourcing to an expert and just managing that business relationship, which is the way that so many companies go. It's about outsourcing to the experts and just managing that business relationship. And that's what it sounds like, that you guys do and do very well.
Yeah,
that's right.
We've talked about this a little bit in terms of the technical side and the network and how do we prevent people from penetrating into the network. But there are other areas where the same model applies. If you're an insurance company and you decide, I don't want to run my own claim department, I'm going to outsource this to a third party to handle my claims. Now you've got customer information, probably sensitive information, maybe health information involved in a claim going to a third party. So it's the same principle. You can certainly contract that to a service provider, but you're still responsible to understand and make sure that that information is secure and doesn't get breached at that third party. So that means you have, when you're selecting them, you have to look at what's their IT environment. How are they going to protect the information? Am I going to let the information out of my own system to theirs? Are they going to use their own system? In which case you've got to worry about how secure it is and set up all the procedures for communicating with them, and the same kind of thing in terms of monitoring what they're doing to ensure that there's not a breach there. That's one of the more, there are certainly cybersecurity risks on the network, but that's one of the more common issues that companies get into when they source things like claims to third parties, because they have to supervise those just as if they were in-house from the standpoint of what the security issues are.
I think we saw in some high-profile breaches the fact that chief security officers had backgrounds, or maybe a music teacher, or it was just someone's cousin, or someone who was given this.
Oh gosh,
a bit shocking, eh? But make sure that their technology and their cybersecurity is being overseen by someone who's credible.
So what would you guys say in terms of best business practices? Like, if you could say, like, let's just take, for instance, like email security and passwords. Something that I know sometimes if you get an email from someone and you have to like put in a code and all of that, and what do you guys feel is like best business practices just on that one area?
I'll do the easy regulatory piece first. And that is, you want to have like a maximum password use, like how many characters? 3 characters are not great, or if someone always says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or password, that's not a good thing. So minimum password lengths and having people change them so that the passwords expire, those are good things that are just basic. Leave it to my technical experts to fill in what I've missed.
I'm a bit of a contrarian in the industry on this, but I think that the best human factors provide the best security. So as most employees want to do the right thing. And so the challenge as a security professional is to try to create an environment that it's easy to do things the right way that are secure. And so you get the tension exists, for example, in passwords. We could say, well, let's have a 24-character password with upper lowercase characters and symbols. And we might be able to argue that that's more secure, and then we'll make everybody change it every 90 days. And what we've done is virtually guarantee that they have to write them down somewhere and compromise security. So the tension in passwords is to have policies that make sense. So I generally am not in favor of a short time frame to force people to change their password for that reason, because you need a password that's long enough and enforces some degree of rules that people aren't just putting in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to make sure that it's a reasonably secure password. And there's a lot of applications that now that give people a sense when they select the password of how secure it is. But you ideally want to minimize the number of passwords. So again, today's world, I've seen companies where employees have to sign on to 5 or 6 different systems, and they've all got unique IDs and passwords. So again, you're going to guarantee in that environment that they have to write them down. So I would say human factors to keep in mind are very important. And a lot of IT security professionals don't, in my view, think enough about that. So that's, again, where the business can push back on some of this. We want an environment that's secure, but we also want it to be easy for employees to do the right thing.
Isn't that also changing? Right now, I can, instead of using my password, I can use fingerprint, or I can now just look at my phone and I could buy products. Which I really, really love. And I'm like, when is that going to move over into the business side, where at a company, you no longer have to write a password down. You simply have gotten your retina scanned or your face recognition scan, and all of a sudden that's going to open up those doors for you, so you no longer need those passwords. I can see that we're there with the iPhone and some of the new technology that people are getting, but how far are we from getting that and the company so that nobody has to be writing down those passwords? So if you do have a 24-letter password in there, it won't matter because you use it that one time, you attach your face to it, whatever it is, or your fingerprint, and that's all it takes for you going to your computer.
Well, I think there's a whole different challenge with biometric authentication. One, that retina scan, that image has to be stored someplace for all of those systems to be able to authenticate that that is actually you. What happens if that server is compromised and your 5,000 customers, 1,000 employees' fingerprints are out?
I would say blockchain that. From what I'm hearing about blockchain, you better have that chain down.
Absolutely, but it happens.
Yeah, the interesting issue around that is if your password's compromised, you can change your password. If you're authenticating with a fingerprint, you can't really change your fingerprint. So once it's compromised, you have an issue around that. So the industry has a lot of these technologies. They are being used in selective cases, and they're certainly effective. But I would say that I would agree that there's a lot more work needed on them in order to make sure that they're really secure. You still will almost inevitably get involved in some of this if you're allowing customers to use apps and things on your phones, because a lot of them have reverted to biometrics, which are generally stored on the device and encrypted. So it's not a case of you having the security on your own server. And then you have to decide, through an analysis, are you satisfied with that level of security? A number of the banks now will let you access your accounts with the Face ID on the iPhone. So again, they've obviously made a decision, but it's a degree of risk. And that's, again, the kind of thing that we can help people walk through that. It's ultimately a business decision as to how much risk you want to take. We can explain what it is. But I think generally we're still stuck with passwords for the next, at least the next 4 years or so.
There are companies that have super high security, and they have retinal and biometric scans for getting into parts of buildings. Jim and I both experienced that, especially in certain data centers. But again, that's super expensive and super complicated.
Oh, wow. We actually have that in our office to get into our server rooms. It's all done by biometric scans.
I'm not surprised.
The other thing that we haven't talked about is two-factor authentication, which means that I'm not going to rely just on a password. I'm going to rely on two things. So it's generally something that I know and something that I have. So if you think about going to an ATM, you have to put your card in, something you have, and then you have to key in your password, something that you know. And so some solutions involve that with laptops, where I've got to maybe have my ID badge and put that in the laptop with a chip, sort of like the chips on the credit card, and I have to know the password to log on. So two-factor things, again, are generally more secure because those are harder to breach. Somebody may discover the password, but they still can't log on because they don't have your employee badge. Or somebody finds the employee badge, but they don't know your password, so they can't log on. So that's more common today in terms of system access.
That's interesting. And it brings me to a time after we suffered with Hurricane Maria. And I actually we have a bank account where they have the two-step authentication, like what you're talking about. And that was just so frustrating. And here's the scenario. So you're trying to get into your bank account because you have a little bit of internet service, and the two-step authentication is requesting that, or what it does is it gives you a call. And once you get that call, you're supposed to get this code on your phone and enter it onto your computer. That was like something that you could just not do right after the hurricane. And so that brings me back to a really tough time that we went through. So wow. I didn't like that two-step authentication at all.
Well, that's because of this scenario, I think, that hasn't been thought out, that they haven't wrestled with that issue. I do like the fact that when somebody uses my card somewhere, I get a phone call that they're authenticating that. At least they're saying, hey, was this you, or is this you trying to? Well, no, you just saw me take your records show that I just took a plane to Puerto Rico and my card is being used in,
Norway.
In Florida oh yeah. So no, it's not me, but I like the fact that they're at least doing that part. And I know that maybe that's taking away from exactly where we're talking about.
No, but this is part of something we have for insurers, and that's one, disaster planning. and business continuity plans and enterprise risk management plans. So on the insurer level, you have to look at these issues like what happens when the lightning bolt strikes? Can you do business? Because at that phase, it's, will citizens in my state be able to get help from their insurer? And so it used to be just thinking about the claims decision trees. But with certain disasters, we think about the entire company. What will happen if the infrastructure of the business unit is shut down, or there's a breach or some other issue? How can it continue running? And so those are things that we should all consider. And with energy, anytime that's a resource. If that resource is gone due to a hurricane or an earthquake or a superstorm, how can the company function? That's something that we all should start to think about, even if we're not required to have the fancy disaster and enterprise risk planning.
Krista, would you happen to have like an example of a particular state that is coming out with some guidelines for cybersecurity, let's say for an insurer?
Yeah, I like one that's sort of simple, and it's from Texas. They basically have on the Texas Department of Insurance website like the areas, there's like really 13 or 14 that they want you to look at. And I think they're very good because it's simple. It's the framework. It's the risk assessment and research. That's first of all, know your company. Then two, have some written policies and procedures and write down when they started. You put that in the header or footer of the documents. 3, what's your IT backup? Then 4, what are your access restrictions? How do you keep people out of the company? Or if you want them to be in the company, how do you allow them in? And then 5, how are you going to test this? Vulnerability scans would be a really good thing. And we discussed 6, password policy. And we can say we can make it too complex and then it's useless because everyone's writing everything down. Or you can have it reasonable, but look at your company. 7, you need to have an executive in charge, whether it's internally provided, internet and cybersecurity, or external. And they refer to that as your CISO, your Chief Information Security Officer. So that's a really important role because that's the person who's saying, is everything working? And let's have you tell me and report into me to make sure. You have 8, your cybersecurity personnel or your third-party service provider security folks. Then you want to test it, or you want to have an idea of like what happens if things go wrong. So think about having incident response plans. And this is a good thing to have. The thing that we've also just touched on greatly is data retention. What do you keep? What do you delete? And how do you get rid of it? That's important. And then for people like me, like training and monitoring, how do you make sure that your employees are doing things well? And again, there's a lot of technological things that can help you look at that. If you are HIPAA or you're doing things out the country, that puts another huge layer, and that's something that you definitely should get outside help with. And then 13, you as a company have an audit trail. Record what you're doing, especially if you're a licensee and you're going to be regulated. The key thing for all these points, these 13 points, is it should be written. There should be a record of it to make sure that's done. So if you're audited as a broker who is doing business in New York, or you are in South Carolina, or the other states that we expect almost all states to have a similar bills or regulations enacted, you better get ready because these things are going to be the norm.
Just to clarify, so this cybersecurity requirement, is it for anyone in the insurance industry, an insurance agency, large broker, or just the carriers?
Okay, in Texas, it's just the carriers.
Okay.
In New York, it's a licensee, and there's a size test. There's an employee test, and then a size test of your revenue, and then assets. So if your employees are over a certain amount, if you over 10, if your annual revenue is over a certain amount, and that's $5 million. And gross annual revenue. And if your total your assets are over 10 million, then you're going to have to, you're not going to be able to get a waiver, and then you're going to have to indicate to New York that you have a plan. Whether or not they're going to investigate or have an examinations, that's another, that's something I don't know. One thing New York did initially is they sent out cybersecurity inquiries to all the carriers, and the industry, this is years back, they were like, wait, what are you asking us about this for? And so then the New York says, wait a minute, we'll look at essentially like the top 50 insurer groups in each category: life, health, property and casualty, workers' comp. And what happened is New York was able to really learn about what is the supreme best practices for these big companies. Now, I do hope that New York, and when it's looking at smaller companies, says, well, you have to have things that are commensurate with your size and your risk. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a minimal floor about what you need to have in place. And so the entire industry should look at this and be watching like what's going to be possible. And maybe it means that there won't be as many smaller brokerages and agencies. Maybe there'll be larger ones because of the cost and the complexity and of having to have robust IT policy, procedure, and departments, and robust cybersecurity.
Just to go back on the intricacies of New York cybersecurity filing requirements, I just want to clarify this is for all licensees, whether they are residents or non-residents, correct?
That is correct. And I think I've spoken to brokers who are very surprised. They're like, wait a minute, I'm not in the state. That's not my home state. But that really doesn't matter. If you're supervised and regulated by the Department of Insurance, meaning you have a license, and then you meet the employee, the gross revenue, and the total asset test, then you're going to have a plan.
And another thing that I would like to point out is, there are lots of agencies out there that get licensed across the United States, perhaps with the thought in mind that they're going to be doing business in the near future in that state. Even if you did not write any business in New York and you hold a non-resident license, you have to comply with the cybersecurity filing requirement. So that's very important to know.
Yes, that's right. And it's surprising many folks who come to us, and I'm about to bring Jim on to another client and to help them because they did not realize that they would be subject to New York cybersecurity regulations. And in fact, this company had something like 10 tiny policies. So they're like, wait a minute, this is not even profitable state for us, and we're responsible.
Right. But again, I just want to point out, you could have zero policies
Exactly.
in that state. So no income derived from New York, but because you hold that license, you have to meet the, if you meet the test, you have to comply.
Is this an area where we're going to have to, if I'm a broker or I own a company in the industry, and I am going to have to take the information from all the different states and kind of compile it because it might be different from one state and another. So if I'm licensed in all 50 states, I've got to look at these 50 different cybersecurity policies and really make one huge one, because New York may not cover the points in Texas. Texas is not going to cover the ones in California, and then Florida might have a few added different ones that I'm going to have to look at. So am I going to have to compile this list?
Well, I think that one thing, we have the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and that's all 56 U.S. jurisdictions, including Guam and the U.S. Mariana Islands. They all get together and they think, let's try to have as many consistent laws and regulations. So right now, the NAIC has a model law, and that's something that South Carolina has adopted in part. But New York has always been the toughest state, and they came up out ahead. And there's the New York Department of Financial Services regulates banks and insurance. So that's a tougher law. I think New York will be the toughest, but the other states will be more in line with the NAIC suggestions. This is a good place to rely on your trade associations like your American Compliance Insurance Professionals, ACIP, or look at the NAIC because they'll be coming out with guidance to the industry, as well as your own home regulator, giving them a call, giving your DOI a call about this. Those things will be important, but rely on your industry associations, also like the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, the Big I. This is some place where your trade associations will be very valuable in helping you manage this process. But I predict they'll be in a New York model and then the national model.
Fantastic.
So, Krista, I just want to, because New York is such a big state, I just want to clarify a couple of things with New York. Are there anything that's unique about meeting that test? Like, let's say, you have 2 employees. Are you good to go? Do you feel like, hey, I don't have to comply with the filing requirements for cybersecurity in New York?
Well, I would be very careful because if you have less than 10 employees, let's say you're 5, but you have independent contractors, then you can be swept in. And also there's another thing that it's not crystal clear to me, but I have seen companies try to avoid compliance requirements by restructuring their company. So let's say I have 3 officers who are employees, but then I put everyone else in a separate company and they're providing services for my company. They really are the de facto employees. I think that might get you in trouble.
Why would anyone, any agency, try to circumvent this filing requirement? Is it so complicated?
If you're a smaller company and you haven't thought about your cybersecurity program and all the things we're discussing, it's confusing if it's new to you. So they might say, oh, I have to have a cybersecurity program and policies and a CISO, and I have vulnerability scans, audit trails, access privileges. It just it feels overwhelming, really overwhelming. So, I mean, the thing is, you want to get a vendor or a consultant that is familiar with these issues operationally, because at the end of the day, you have IT and cybersecurity, but the company has to operate. It has to run. It has to be profitable. So you need people who understand that these are the tensions that you have. Like, this feels like a distraction, but it can't be. But you also have your core business.
So take me to today, like right now. You know, we just, New York just came out with their cybersecurity filing requirements. I think the first deadline was maybe March 1st and then maybe an extension. But let's say you find out that you have to file, that you have to meet these requirements, but you don't have all these things in place. What happens? Is New York going to slap you with a fine? I mean, you're just finding out about this right now. What are agencies and companies doing right now?
I don't have enough intelligence on the penalties or enforcement, but I do know 2 companies who New York said to them, you better get this together. So in in the next few months, one is going to look at the cybersecurity program, writing that out, policies, access privileges, their cybersecurity personnel having one person in charge an incident response plan. And then they have another 6 months. They're working with the regulators to roll out and transition what they're going to do, the various components of a robust security plan. But I'd say when they, talk to New York is aware, I'm sure, that there's so many smaller companies that this is new to them. But you do want to find a good quality vendor who knows how to do this, and perfectly someone in the insurance industry.
Very valuable information. Thank you so much.
So guys, is there anything here that you think we are missing? I know we didn't hit on any horror stories, and I know that the folks in cybersecurity here, Cybershark, Tim, do you have any stories that you can relate to us that you've seen recently that really makes your point about the need for what you're doing?
Absolutely, Ted. And there's so many different scenarios that actually happen. I think hacking now, they're smarter, they're targeting. One of the biggest things that we're seeing going on right now is cryptoware and ransomware. Infected natively, it started 3 or 4 years ago. Now they're getting smart. They're sending resumes to HR. Well, an HR person is going to put a resume, and within that is an embedded executable that infects it. So a lot of this really revolves around education of the people as well, the end user. Even some of the best virus scanners in the world still miss embedded executables within documents. Everything's encrypted now, right? Everything you go online, HTTPS, the S stands for secure. When we connect to our office networks, it's through VPN. Well, 60% of all attacks now go through VPN and secure protocols. So I think there's a sense of security that most individuals have that doesn't really exist. Things are evolving so quickly. And they're getting better at all of the types of technology solutions that we're throwing at. They're bypassing. So bringing this back to people, that's probably the key to any type of security program. I had a top 5 auto manufacturer. They trusted their people so much that they lost over $1 billion of R&D and proprietary information to their competitor because a senior VP left there, went over to Japan, took it to another top 5 auto company, and gave it to them. That was part of his position. And they didn't have a policy in place to prevent that or to actually go after him legally. So these rules, like I stated before, it's not just to protect the state or protect the end customers. It's to protect the business. So moving forward, these companies should really look at it as, the government, state and local, and regulatory compliance is really trying to help them. 60% of small businesses, less than 100 employees that experience a compromise, they're out of business in 6 months. So these horror stories happen daily, and it can happen to anybody, whether it's ransomware, whether it's losing R&D or any type of proprietary information, even customer records, even employee records. 15 employees and you lose all of their HIPAA information. It's got their social, medical records. The lawsuits that open up after a compromise like that, it's unreal. So I hope folks that are listening to this podcast kind of take it seriously and understand that it's about their company that we're trying to protect.
And one thing about the regulations, they give you like the chapter headings of what you need to think about. And in the regulations and laws, there's a lot of flexibility so you can adjust to your company. But pay attention to best practices.
And there's so much information available out there around programs and what best practice really is. And it's very specific to vertical, the state you reside in, number of employees, type of company. It's out there. It's available.
One thing that we haven't talked about is social media. So there's typically a need for policies relating to employees' use of social media because, as we talked about, the people, either through inadvertent errors or sometimes deliberately, using channels to get information out. And social media is sometimes used to determine employees and do some what we call social engineering in terms of people's password or access into a company, or what the practices are, and things get inadvertently disclosed. So there's a need for policy around that usage and some education for employees in terms of use of it. The other thing I would say is, and this is like heresy for me because I'm a technology guy, but you have to look at this holistically in the business. One breach that I had experience with involved disclosure of credit cards. It ended up costing the company I was with upwards of $100 million to fix the problem. And in the end, it related to somebody that forgot to change a password. But the credit card numbers left on paper in somebody's briefcase from the office. So in effect, they had access, they printed it, they took it out on paper. So sometimes, we get all worried about hacking and penetrating the network, and that's important. Don't forget your other procedures in terms of, printed material and how things can leave the office that way. That's a very important part of the policies and practices in an organization as well. It's not uncommon to go into an organization, say if you're a cleaner at night, and find all kinds of confidential information sitting on people's desks in paper form.
Very good. One thing that we like to end our Spot On Insurance podcast with is a piece of advice for people that are new in the industry. And I think I'm actually going to share some really valuable information to those that are perhaps just getting into the insurance industry and are just changing directions or exploring what's out there. I would suggest look into cybersecurity and getting some of those certifications that you need. So we heard today that there is like a gap of 3 million cybersecurity experts out there. And some of the starting salaries are at around $170,000, perhaps for just 2 certifications. So I would share that with people that are out there that are coming into this. It sounds like, there's going to be regulations that it's going to be needing to be enforced throughout every single state. So get in there and learn a little bit more about cybersecurity in the insurance industry.
Great advice.
If someone in our circle of professionals wants to get in touch with each one of you, how do they go about it? Jim, we'll start with you with SI Innovators.
Sure. My email is jwklinck, JWKLINCK at si-innovators.com, or you could give me on that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter as well as @JWKlinck, if that's easier for you to access me. And we'd be glad to talk with you. We're really in the business of helping people address these issues in terms of guiding them through what they need in terms of policies from a business sense, because it also has to reflect the way you want to run your business. And also helping design solutions and then oversee the implementation with whatever third parties you select.
Tim, how about you?
Well, my mobile is always the best way because I'm on the road a lot. 415-994-2614. If you prefer email, it's tpazda, Pazda, at blackstratus.com.
And finally, Krista.
Well, for email, you can get me at CS Rapoport. That's RAPO as an open, PO as an open, RT at ntgconsultants.com, or by cell. I'm a big texter because I have teenagers. 973-508-3967.
Guys, if I have not done so, I want to really thank you for the valuable information that you have given to our listeners today. It's been a fantastic time. I know Arlene feels the same way. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Visit SpotOnInsurance.com, where you'll discover an ever-growing library of podcasts, videos, articles, and online tools by professionals for professionals to enhance your insurance education. By the way, that's where you'll also find our podcast notes and bonus resources. Please don't forget to click the iTunes link to rate and review, and let others know what you think of Spot On Insurance. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.